Hey Gumbooters, and welcome back to the Gumboot garden. Today we're talking about how to water bath can, because if you are growing your own garden, there's a good chance you're going to need to learn how to do this as well to help preserve some of your food. And I know I do this a ton, along with steam bath canning, which is essentially the same process, and I'll be making a video for that as well. But I wanted to go over the basics of your water bath canning today so that when you are watching any of my other videos that includes water bath canning and you're unsure how to do that, you can quickly refer back to this video and get all the basics again before then preserving. So today we are making applesauce with all of these apples, and that's primarily when you're going to be doing your water bath canning, is when you're working with high acidity foods like fruits, some tomatoes, your vinegars, and that's going to be the water bath canning process. But you do need to make sure that the acidity is high enough where the foods aren't going to spoil. In order to ensure that you are using a recipe that is safe and high enough in acidity, it's good to use books like your ball canning books. So I use this one here, and I'll link this down in the description box below, but this is your Ball Complete Book of Home Preserving. This has so many recipes in it. And then, I always look here first to make sure I can get a safe recipe. It tells you different tips and pointers of different things that you might be able to add or not add that will change the acidity. This is a lot safer to use than just kind of going on the internet and finding some random person's recipe, because you never know if they have actually tested that to make sure that it's high enough in acidity. So get yourself a ball canning book, and this is the first place to start. So today we're using this for our applesauce recipe, and that's on page 180 if you are wondering. But on this, it is just saying that we're not just putting in apples and sugar and a little bit of water, but we also need to add in our lemon juice. And the lemon juice is just going to ensure that we are having the high enough acidity that we need, because different apples will have a different acidity level. So lemon juice is often something that we will add into our recipes to increase that acidity to make sure that it's going to be safe. Because although you can get things where you can test the acidity of your recipes, if you're like me, you probably don't have that. But let's get this canning process started. So I actually don't have an actual water bath canner, and you don't need one either. You just need to get yourself a big stock pot like I have here, and we are going to fill this with water, and we're going to use this as our water bath canner. And we're going to start by adding in cold water, because we're going to be putting cold jars into our water bath canner. And we want to make sure that we're putting enough water in here that we're going to be able to put our jars in, and they're going to be covered with at least 1 inch of water over the rim. If you're using a normal pot like we have here and not a water bath canner, we're going to want to put a cloth on the bottom of the pan just to make sure that it's giving a barrier between our jars and our pot. If you have a typical water bath canner, you don't need to do this. Okay. Before we go any further, I want to talk about jars. Now, if you want to go 100% by the US canning regulations and all of that, you're going to want to get yourself some mason jars. And mason jars are the glass jars that have the metal cover here with your screw top lid. And they just screw on like this. Okay, I think you can also get other similar jars like Ag, which I think have like a little clip on the top and have a rubber seal. They're a little bit different, but these types of jars are going to be safe. The only thing you need to do is each time that you're canning, this metal lid you will need to replace, because we want to worry about that seal on the bottom. Once it has already been sealed, it will have a little ridge already made in here, and we might not get a tight seal like we want. So you need to replace these lids each and every time. I do have quite a few of these jars, and I use them a lot, especially for things that I want to 100% make sure have been sealed. They're really important. They're very valuable items I'm putting in them. And the primary reason for that is because I found that when you are using these jars with these lids, they seal a lot better. You're going to get a better percentage that fully seal, okay? And you'll know that they are sealed because when the top is on, so this one obviously isn't sealed. I've just put the top on this one. So something that's not sealed will have that clicking noise. Where if I'm to grab one that is sealed, I have some crushed tomatoes here. There's no noise because it's suctioned down. That is safe. And I can actually hold this jar right by the top and it's not going to come off. Okay, so those are your safe jars, right? Your mason jars with your lid, your fresh little lid, and you can can things in that. I, however, do things a little bit differently. Like I said, I do use those jars for my valuable items, but when I am canning things like applesauce or jam, when I'm not overly concerned about them all 100% sealing, I do reuse jars. Now, this is something that is sometimes frowned upon, and it's up to you whether you choose to do this or not. So this is not by the US regulations. This is something I choose to do. You may not choose to do this yourself, but I have here old mayonnaise jars that just have a twist top lid. So this just twists on like this. I do use these for my canning, and I'm not sure if you could hear that. It's not sealed. It is making a little like clicking noise, smaller than the sound that was making with the mason jar, but I can tell if it's popped up or down. When these seal, it will also suction down and you won't be able to hear that little clicking noise. So I do use these for my water bath canning. I do not pressure can. I haven't learned that yet. I haven't been able to afford a pressure canner yet. I'm not even sure if it's safe for the stove. But if I were to pressure can, I probably would not use these jars because the pressure is so strong. I wouldn't want there to be any breakage. And that is the worry with your jars from the store. If you're reusing these glass jars, they're said to not be as strong of a glass, and there's a higher chance of breakage. So it's not necessarily that once they're all sealed and in your cupboard that they're not going to be safe. That's not true, but it's the actual process where it can cause some issues, where you might get more breakage, which just kind of wastes your food. I have not had that happen yet, but again, I've only been doing water bath and steam canning. I have not done this with pressure cans or pressure canning, and I probably wouldn't use or reuse these jars for pressure canning. I would probably use mason jars. For today, I'm not using my mason jars. I'm going to reuse my store-bought jars. We're going to take our jars that are clean and we're going to put them into our water bath canner. And again, we need to make sure that they're covered by at least an extra inch of water. As I'm placing these jars in here, the one thing I want to make sure of is that they are not touching the sides and they're not touching each other. To cover these up, and we're gonna get them on high so they come to a rolling boil. Right now we have our empty jars that are coming to a boil. This is to sterilize your jars. So this is something, I guess the rules have kind of changed on this where you don't necessarily need to do this step, but I personally like to do this and know that I have really nice sterile jars that I'm filling up before I'm doing the water bath canning. It just makes me feel better. And this is a newer rule that they've just kind of changed, so I like to still do it. This process with the jars is going to take quite a bit of time because we need to get that water, all of that water, to come up to a rolling boil. Then we're going to need to let those jars stay at that rolling boil for 10 minutes before we then shut it off. So this is a great time where you can go ahead and start prepping all of your stuff. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm going to peel, core, cut all of these apples while we're waiting for those jars to sterilize. It's been about 45 minutes and we're still waiting for our water bath to come up to a boil. So this does take quite a bit of time because we're working with all of that water. Yeah, it takes time. That's why actually I have gotten a steam canner, and the steam canner is the same process, but it uses a lot less water, so it's a quicker process. But you may not have access to that right now. If you are interested in a steam canner instead, I will link that down in the description box for you guys to have a look at. But our water bath canner, it will come along. It just takes more time. So I have been able to cut up all of those apples. I have cooked them and we're going to be blending them soon. But I thought it would be a good time to talk a little bit more about your water bath canning. So water bath canning is definitely the process that you're going to start with if you're a new preserver, because it's a cheaper and easier process to go through. But when you are working with canning up your things in the water bath canner, like your pasta sauce, you can't add meatballs to that. Meatballs will have to come later when you're actually cooking up your dinner. Same thing, you need to be careful with the extra added vegetables. If you add extra vegetables into your sauce, you really want to keep it quite simple. You can add things in like your herbs and spices. That's all good. So you don't have to worry about that when you're doing your water bath canning. Now that our jars have sterilized, we're moving on to the next step. So I have just boiled some water here. I'm going to cover the lids with boiling water and let them sit for at least 10 minutes so that those lids can sterilize as well. And while we're waiting for those to sterilize, we are actually going to start pulling out some of our sterilized jars and filling them up. So on the counter, I have a towel just because we don't want the hot jars to sit on the cold counter, which can cause breakage. So we have to have that barrier. I also have a couple things that are really useful when you're doing this. So I have my jar lifter, which I'm going to use this to grab the jars out of the hot water and to put them back into the water, so that way we're not burning ourselves with the boiling water. The other thing is our funnel. So this is our canning funnel. This works really, really well at keeping everything nice and neat and tidy. However, if you are using jars that aren't your typical mason jars like I am, your store-bought jars, sometimes the bottom of this funnel doesn't fit inside the tops of the jars, which makes it a bit of a pain. But with your mason jars, this will fit in perfectly and rest, and you don't have to worry about it wobbling and falling off. The other thing I have is some paper towels. Once we are done filling the jars, we want to make sure that the top of our jar is nice and clean so that we're going to have a good seal on our jars when we're water bath canning them. And I'm just taking out a couple jars at a time. And we are going to start to dish in our applesauce. We are going to want to fill these jars, but we have to leave what's called a headspace at the top of the jars. So sometimes it will be 1 inch, other times it will be ½ an inch. You really just have to look at the recipe and see what it calls for. This will prevent things like siphoning and make sure that you're getting a nice good seal on your jar. With my butter knife, I'm just going down and I just want to make sure that along this ridge here, there aren't any bubbles that are unable to escape. Same thing along the whole side. Sometimes, depending on what it is, you'll have bubbles. In this case, our applesauce isn't really that bubbly. There's no real extra space in there. But I was tapping that on the counter here, and the reason I was tapping it is because if there are any bubbles that are caught down in there, a lot of times it will push them up to the top, but we do still have to use the knife and just make sure that we can't see any of those bubbles. We release those before we cover them. I wet my paper towel and now I'm just wiping along the edge. And now you can also use white vinegar to clean off the ridge here. I'm just using water and I'm going to screw on my lid just to fingertip tightness. So I'm not going to really cram it on. It's just whatever I can do with my fingertips. Then we're going to grab these jars and pop them back in to our canner. And again, when we're doing this, we want to make sure that they are not touching each other and they're not touching the sides. So when you look down into the pot, none of the jars are touching the edges or each other, and that is exactly what we're looking for. So we're gonna pop the cover on here and turn it back up to high and bring it up to a boil. With our example here today with the applesauce, whether it's a pint jar or a quart jar, we are going to water bath can that for 20 minutes. However, usually there is a difference in time that you have to water bath can that depending on the size of the jar. And you can water bath multiple size jars at the same time, but you have to make sure that the time you're using for the water bath canner is for the larger jar. So if it says that you need 10 minutes for your pint jar, but 20 minutes for your quart jar, and you have a mix of both pints and quarts in your water bath canner, you need to do that for 20 minutes. The other thing that makes a difference is elevation. So when you're looking at your ball canning book or recipe for water bath canning, they're going to give you the time when you're at sea level. So if you are much higher than that, your time does need to be adjusted. So I believe it's an extra 5 minutes when you're at an elevation between like 3,000 and 6,000 feet, and then an additional 5 minutes to that when you're between 6 and 8,000 feet, and then I think the next couple thousand it goes up another 5 minutes, and another 5 minutes. There is a chart that you can look at in this book here, and I'm sure you can find it online as well, or on the USDA regulations. It will show you that, so make sure you look that up and look up the actual elevation you're at. And when you're doing your water bath canning, you cannot start the time limit until we're at a completely rolling boil. So it is going to take some time to bring that water in your water bath canner up to a boil again, a rigorous boil. And once we're at that, then and only then can you start your time limit. Although I'm trying to tell you everything that I can think of as we're doing this canning video, it is also really important that you are doing your own research and checking out that USDA canning regulations for yourself, because they'll be able to tell you everything that has been tested. So you might choose to do things slightly different from that. I choose to do things slightly different from that, but they are going to show you what definitely works, and you won't have any issues with that. So I suggest that you give that a read in addition to following the tips that I have for you today. We've now come to a rolling boil, so I'm gonna go ahead and set my timer. There's our timer. So I'm just going to turn this off, but we're not going to take the jars out just yet. We're going to set another timer for 10 minutes where we're just going to let these kind of calm down a little bit and for that boiling to stop and our jars to lower in temperature slightly. Now I have a big towel ready that I'm gonna lay down on the table just so we don't have any massive temperature clashes between our hot jars and our cool surface. And I'm gonna grab my jar lifter and we're gonna lift these applesauces out and put them on the towel. And then we're gonna wrap these babies up so that they're nice and warm and they can slowly come down to room temperature overnight. Before we put them in the cupboard to store, we do need to make sure that they have fully sealed and they're not gonna go bad in the cupboard. So if you do have your mason jars that you're storing, we did have that ring around our mason jars, but notice that for both this one and the jar that I showed you earlier, I've taken that ring off, and there is a reason for that. So with these covers here, what can happen is that we can get a false seal. So if we have these guys in the cupboard with the ring on and they get too hot or something happens where the seal breaks. If that ring is still on it, the seal can break and then reseal and we'll never know it, which is not a good thing, because what happens is if this seal breaks, it allows bacteria to get in underneath that cover and it can cause botulism. The other thing that we want to take note of is that when we are storing these in the cupboard, we are not stacking them on top of each other. We have to keep them just a single layer so that, again, we are not having that false seal happen and then the reseal. So we need to store these without anything weighing down the top ring in case we get that false seal. But once you have them all sealed and in the cupboard, they will stay good in the cupboard for a long time. The best buy date would be to eat them within the first year, but if you don't get to them in the first year, they're still going to be good. Essentially, they're going to be good for years. It's just that as they stay longer in the cupboard after that year, they're just going to start to lose some of that nutritional value, and eventually you just won't want to eat them. They will discolor slightly, but if you have all sorts of good stuff that you're storing, it's probably not going to last much longer than a year. If you have any other questions about water bath canning, drop them down in the comments below and I'll answer as best as I can. But also have a look at the link that I'm putting in the description box for that USDA regulations for canning. And check out my steam canning video that's coming up soon. I will put it here when it's ready, and then you can check that out because a steam canning is so much of a time saver. It is absolutely ridiculous, and it's just as safe as the water bath canning. So check that one out as well, and I will catch you guys in the next one. See ya.